I wonder what our hearts would look like if we asked God to render it. Is it a dangerous prayer or a prayer that makes us more Christian? Would he tear down the walls we have built trying to keep everyone on the outside because we're used to disappointment? Hiding behind brick walls we've put up and now we can't leave and no one else can come in. If we ask God to rend our hearts, would he break it apart just for it to be healed again? Why go through more trials and tribulations and moving mountains? Why can't God lead us straight to the blessing? Why is there always a lesson in every season? Sometimes I feel like Joseph when he was in prison and felt abandoned. He used his gift to set people free, yet they still turn their backs on him. Now that I think about it, Jesus comes to my remembrance. He was the gift on the cross, but they didn't accept him. He was the ultimate salvation, yet they still turn their backs on him. Isn't it selfish how God has given us everything we need on earth and from the heavens? Everything we need to give him glory and be in his presence, yet we can't comply with one of the greatest commandments to love one another because we face rejection. As if God took the crown of thorns and nails in his hands because it was pleasant. Like he didn't face rejection from the very moment he picked up the cross and said there's about to be a resurrection. And everyone who abides in him will see redemption. Everyone who seeks his face will be protected. And everyone who's connected to him will be made in his perfection. I know that might go over some heads because they're used to being broken. But God is saying, I want to make you whole again. You think it's coincidence, but God is saying, you're chosen. God, rend our hearts. Help us to be rooted again. I believe in a generation that will be unshaken. You're never too young or too old to be anointed for it. Watch out for the sister you sitting next to because they're about to be appointed. It's a new level and nobody has ever seen it. You think all your pain and tears were in vain, but God said, I was watering the soil with it. I needed your roots to get deep so you can access a hidden stream. He said, if you abide in me, you'll never get thirsty. I know you wanted to sprout up earlier, but your roots needed to get deep. If you would have came up earlier, you would have been a flower instead of a tree. I said, if you would have came up earlier, you would have been a flower instead of a tree. A flower gets uprooted easily, but a tree can't handle greater wind speeds. God, help us. God, help us be trees that would go through storms without losing leaves. Even if it looks impossible, make it possible because it's what we need. God, help us be so rooted that even in a drought, we are drinking from your stream because the surface doesn't determine what happens beneath. I said the surface doesn't determine what happens beneath. God, rend our hearts. Strip away every iniquity, pride, and anxiety. Cast away every insecurity, disease, and sexual immorality. Bind every spirit of barrenness and infirmity. God, we are waging war with the enemy. But sometimes I feel like the enemy is the inner me. Being rooted doesn't happen easily. God, we are waging war with the enemy. But sometimes I feel like the enemy is the inner me. Being rooted doesn't happen easily. God, help us not be deceived. God, open our eyes so we can see. God, fill our lungs so we can breathe. God, rend our hearts so we can receive. When we rend our hearts, it's an act of humility. God is not just breaking our hearts, but separating pieces that hinder our identity. Before we hit the stage, there's work that needs to happen behind the scenes. Before the seed came up, he had to be buried beneath. We don't rejoice because of the crucifixion, but the resurrection because he took the keys. So if I'm rooted in Christ, that means no grave can hold me. And if I'm rooted in Christ, that means I've been set free. And if I'm rooted in Christ, that means I know my identity. And if I'm rooted in Christ, that means I've been redeemed. So let our roots produce fruit so everyone knows we're royalty.